Welcome to Cultivated Live for, what is today? Tuesday, March 12th, 2024. I'm Jay Rosenthal. I'm the co-founder of Cultivated Media and co-host of Cultivated Live. And you are Brad Spirrison.
Brad Spirrison with Grown In, and I'm thankful to be alive today.
It's a good one to be alive.
Yes.
Yeah.
70 degrees in Chicago today. So, just another winter in the Windy City.
We don't call it 70 degrees here. We call it about 15 degrees, but it is warm here in Toronto, and I'm going to say unseasonably so. I want to say that as opposed to saying it's nice outside, because it is unseasonably warm and sunny, which appears nice, but is also fraught with all kinds of other things, which we won't get into.
Nothing to see here.
Nothing to see here, yeah. But we launched Cultivated. Have a big transition here. We launched Cultivated as a way to be reader first and provide the cannabis industry the most important, insightful, and useful information to our audience. And we do that a lot through our daily newsletter, Cultivated Daily, which we absolutely want you to subscribe to. But we also wanted to meet the industry where it is. And on LinkedIn and YouTube is where the industry is a lot. And so we added this live stream to the mix about a month ago. And because it's Tuesday, that's why Brad's here, we have a segment called United States of Cannabis, which is a conversation at the intersection of cannabis, politics, and policy. My dear friend and co-host of this, Brad Spirrison. Brad, I really like doing this every Tuesday. It gives me something to look forward to.
No, Tuesday is a perfect day, given it's election day. It's election day in Illinois coming up in a couple of weeks. Maybe we'll do something on that. But this has been a great way to really illustrate a lot of the wonderful work that you've been doing at Cultivated and we've been doing at Grown In. And I can't wait to meet our guest later this episode.
Yeah, Joanne Caceres will be with us after you and I run through the news from Dentons. We're going to talk rescheduling, safe banking. Maybe we'll get into some of the things we talk about in the news as well, because things, it's always front burner for us, but it appears that the cannabis conversation is front burner for a lot of people, especially in DC, especially following the State of the Union last Thursday when the president actually, can I play the 12 seconds?
Let's do it.
I have it ready. Here's what the president said, the State of the Union.
Directing my cabinet to review the federal classification of marijuana and expunging thousands of convictions for the mere possession, because no one should be jailed for simply using or have it on their record.
I liked it. I still like it. All this time later, I've been playing it on loop.
Bouncer step on that one too.
What's that?
Kamala, the vice president, had an extra bounce. She got up about 1,400 times during the State of the Union, but that one, it was like she was doing jumping jacks.
Yeah, she was ready. She was ready. All right, Brad, you want to get into the news?
Let's do it.
All right, so let's go to New Hampshire first, because Governor Sununu has some pretty specific ideas about cannabis. This is actually a great follow-up to our conversation last Tuesday about New Hampshire. And those that tuned in know how interesting the path forward is going to be in New Hampshire. So there's Governor Sununu is Republican, is not going to run again. So he's let's call him a lame duck governor. He reiterated that he would sign a bill, legalization bill, but he wanted it to be a state-run and or franchise model. This is according to a story in Marijuana Moment. Now, New Hampshire is the only holdout in New England that doesn't have sort of legal adult use cannabis. What was described to us through the New Hampshire Cannabis Association last week is that the model that the governor seems to want and Republicans in the state Senate seem to want is where there would be a franchise model. It would be state run, which brings into question, like, can you have a franchise model where the state is the franchisor of an industry that is not federally legal? Because franchise law, my understanding, is like regulated by the FTC federally. So that's like one thing that is a big question mark in New Hampshire. The other, do you want a state to be in the plant touching business where they are like own stores or are franchisees? The trade association said they do not want those two things, but also that the state should not want them. I like that we had this conversation last Tuesday and now it's super topical because the governor is talking about it. Brad, what was your take on last week, but also sort of what the news is today?
Yeah, you can't get around the federal illegality, so you wonder, and we're going to get into the rescheduling conversation momentarily, you wonder if they're betting on some sort of rescheduling that would enable the state to more easily get into the plant touching trade. At this point, we're in this, may I say, interregnum, where
you can.
I just did, where they're looking to enact a policy that could actually run afoul of federal laws, but that might be the only way to get it through, which is purely cannabis And the one holdout state for states where you could no longer legally be holding is New Hampshire. And I think it'll remain that way for some time.
Yeah, I also think it is so New Hampshire to have this conversation where on the license plate it says live free or die, but that really only is maybe for everything except alcohol, and in this case, cannabis, because they actually don't want it to be free, or it's like they don't really want a libertarian approach to this. They actually want a pretty tight government control over it. And can I just run one thing that Representative Burrows, who's the co-sponsor of the bill in the House, what she said last week, because I thought it was a very good line. So I have that video ready. Hold on one sec.
And we're seeing a conga line of cars going over the border every day to get product. So I think the main thing that we're seeing in the other states is that we're losing out on this money. In this bill, 65% of the money that we raise is going to go towards education, which we really need to fill those coffers. So it makes no sense. It makes no sense to see that money go out the door and down the street.
Literally, in this case, yeah, she was great and spoke very bluntly. I encourage everybody to watch that because she had some great insight. And actually, in fairness, she is the co-sponsor. There is sort of the author of the bill is a Republican state assembly person, and she was not with us, but they spoke very highly of sort of her dedication on this issue. So we'll just wait and see, I guess, in New Hampshire. But another place that is in the news today is Minnesota. So those that follow the industry closely know how Minnesota, I'm going to call it quasi-legalized by mistake, edibles and beverages years ago. Now they actually have passed legalization and they're putting sort of the framework in place. But there is this like in between where they have like hemp stores in Minnesota that are actually selling flour. They call it hemp flour, but Brad, is hemp flour just flour by a different name?
You know, I think that hemp flour is flour, obviously. And it's one of the, we're going to talk about rescheduling, we're going to talk about SAFE, but really, if you look at the 2018 Farm Bill and what it enabled CBD to do, that in essence could, in retrospect, be where legalization, has historically began, because you have this ambiguity where how are you going to test it? How are you going to regulate it? How are you going to put that genie back into the bottle? It is essentially weed. It might be lower potency weed, but the difference between that and anything else you can get from a regulated or a street market, I think, is negligible relative to anything else.
Well, and the Office of Cannabis Management in Minnesota is basically saying the same thing. They say they're about to make phone calls to regulated hemp stores or registered hemp stores to tell them that flour is now regulated and to take it off the shelves or something similar. So some of the juicy parts of what Minnesota's been going through seem to be getting cracked down on, which I think will be good news for the folks that want to start being a regulated cannabis store in Minnesota sometime in 2025. But we shall see. One other thing of note, Brad, that I want to mention before we get to Joanne and the rest of the conversation is that the governor of Massachusetts, my home state, Governor Maura Healey, is also making cannabis news this week. She's expected to announce, I think today, a blanket pardon for those convicted of simple possession in Massachusetts. I like this trend for sure.
Bravo. It's Illinois and other states, and certainly Cannabis 2.0 east of the Mississippi, have adopted such a thing. And we talk so much about the commercialization of cannabis, and more attention should be made and more recognition should be made toward executives that also relieve us from criminal liability and burdens.
I will also say that it's not just Maura Healey, who's awesome in Massachusetts and a statewide elected official, but Elizabeth Warren also last week before the State of the Union had a video on Twitter/X where she called again and again and again for descheduling of cannabis on the federal level. So shout out to my homies. I don't know. Maura Healey and Elizabeth Warren are not my homies, but I do like to call them one of my own because I am from Massachusetts, that they are leading the charge both on the state level in Massachusetts and the federal level in DC. And with that, Brad, we're going to bring up Joanne Caceres. Give me one sec. There we go. Joanne, welcome. You are, of course, from Dentons. Give us a little bit of your background, and then we're going to jump into United States of Cannabis and talk all things rescheduling, descheduling, all that stuff. Give us a little bit of the background.
Sure. I'm a partner at Dentons, as you mentioned. I live and sit in Chicago with Brad. I've been doing cannabis law since 2015. I like to say, as a while I was a baby lawyer. So I was a healthcare litigant, and I had a partner approach me and ask if I had any interest in doing some cannabis law. And it was like, do I? Throw away everything else I'm doing. Of course, I'd love to do that. I was really hoping actually that I would get arrested, because I had been told by the partner that we would be defended if we get arrested for helping cannabis companies do their applications back in 2015. It didn't happen, obviously. It would have been a much cooler story if it did, but that was kind of the launch of it. And now I do cannabis and hemp law 100% of the time, which is a dream come true.
And is it, can I ask a question just about that? And then we'll jump into it. Like, is it regional? Is it state by state? Do you focus on one state, or is it where there are clients doing cannabis work, you are there, Joanne?
Yeah, it's pretty national. We do help a lot of the MSOs, or have at different times, but I do also have kind of a cultivated practice in Illinois specifically. Obviously, since I sit here, I know the regulators more familiarly, but yeah, mostly national and ancillary. So not all plant touching.
Right. You heard the stories we just sort of talked through. Like, when you think about rescheduling, and we'll talk sort of timing and all that, but like, are there things that would be a lot simpler, like from a legal perspective, if rescheduling were, I don't know what the right word is, approved by the DEA or?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. It will launch uncertainty again in a certain way, right? Like, we kind of at least know where we are right now. Similar to what Brad said about the Farm Bill, it's interesting. We really weren't talking about that as a backdoor legalization, but I kind of agree with you now, Brad. It really has proven out that it kind of was. And I think rescheduling is going to be a similar moment to that. Like, when the Farm Bill passed, I think I spent the next 6 months feeling like I was on a treadmill, because every state had to figure out what it was going to do and how it was going to react and what rules it was going to set. And as you guys know, it was so broad. You know, some states just said, okay, cool, hemp is legal, nothing else. Some states had full regulations with packaging and labeling and blah, blah. It's almost impossible to keep up with. And I think it's really interesting what you mentioned about New Hampshire and how rescheduling could be playing into their strategy, right? Every state's going to have to react to rescheduling. A lot of states have automatic laws that will automatically reschedule cannabis at the state level, but that might be something people aren't aware of, right? Each state has its own Controlled Substances Act and its own schedules. Actually, some states, when they pass medical cannabis, moved cannabis. So some states have cannabis sitting, like medical cannabis is sitting in Schedule 2 or something, which is kind of strange. But so each state has to react. Some states it'll be automatic. Some states you'll actually need to do something. And I'm really interested to see, will states lower some of their compliance requirements or all that stuff, right? We put all that stuff in for the Cole Amendment, right? We had to protect against all this stuff to not have enforcement. Now we're 10 years into no enforcement. Do we really need all that stuff? Do we really need like a huge vault to hold a plant, right? I would love to see those things get looser. It'll be interesting to see what people do. And I'd actually love for New Hampshire to try the franchise model. Maybe it's a terrible idea, but like, you know, the states are the laboratories of democracy. Let's see how it works. I've always wondered if franchise law would be beneficial for social equity applicants, right? Like, I've always thought, like, you give these people licenses, but they have no resources. But if they were state franchises, you could give them the resources they need to get started. The problem is, you know, the government usually doesn't do things the best, right, when it comes to business. So, you know, whether it succeeds or fails, I'm not going to pretend to know. I'm not an MBA, but I think it'd be.
You like it from the precedent-setting nature of it.
Yeah, I like it from being new. And like this idea that you have to be worried about violating franchise law, like you're violating the Controlled Substances Act, you're violating the FDCA. Like, those are kind of big deals, and we've been doing it for years. So I don't know that the FTC is going to be the one that comes out guns blazing all of a sudden, right? Like, it'd
be awesome if they did. That would be like, they'd be so
it'd be cool, right?
And there's people at the FTC being like, go do it.
So we ran the clip earlier of President Biden at the State of the Union address, and everyone's favorite pot parlor game is the timing of rescheduling. Joanne, we've talked about, you know, maybe, you know, the optimists among us thought something could have been done prior to the State of the Union. Now, what do you think the next window of opportunity is for there to be, you know, meaningful dialogue between HHS and EPA?
It's so funny because I think this will probably be like my fourth or fifth incorrect prediction about when rescheduling will happen on live air, but that's fine. I'm always happy to be wrong. I think there was a strong belief that it would happen before the State of the Union, because we thought he would want to touted at the State of the Union. And he sort of did that with, the prior actions instead of the new one, right? Now, I think the other rumors we had heard was that it would either be before the State of the Union or it would be around 420 because the government thinks it's cute to announce it around that time. Which, I mean, it sounds crazy enough that it could be true, but I'm not going to hold my breath. But yeah, so I've heard that around then. I've also heard early summer. But if you get too close to the election, it's going to start feeling like it's not the right time. So I don't know. I feel like there's a limited window, and the result feels more uncertain today, actually, with the news, right? But we'll see.
Yeah. It was also, Brad, I think on our first show, it was actually Elizabeth Warren was on Pod Save America. And there was a story that when they asked her when rescheduling was going to happen, she winked at them. Like there was like this show note, like she's winking at me right now, like she knows something. So it is interesting to sort of think about the political ramifications. What I don't know, what's unclear, like DEA seems very non-political to me. I mean, I know it is, it's part of the federal government, obviously, but I do think like would 420 almost be too cute? But, the government is full of those things. There's a lot. I think there was a bill in, I want to say Montana, where they were going back and trying to or maybe Idaho, trying to re-regulate some things. And it was like the fine for something was $420, right? It was like,
Yeah.
it's like the one thing that non-cannabis users actually know. And so they like to do a wink and a nod.
They're going to prohibit it, but in a funny way.
Right. That's right. We're gonna be prohibitionists, but we're gonna make it cute. One other thing that has actually bubbled as well is safer banking. I think it was last week that Chuck Schumer, the Senate Majority Leader, said it was, I forget the right words because he always says the same words, but like a priority to pass it before November. Mm-hmm. Like that also seems like a big deal and is much more in the realm of like there could be a vote on something. Joanne, what's your thoughts on sort of that and maybe like what the next 6 months after that would look like? Because obviously there would be ramifications that you would have to unpack as a lawyer.
Yeah, it definitely feels like the time for SAFE has come. Although, again, in the realm of wrong predictions, people were saying that in December of 23 and in December of 22 as well. I did hear once, I think it was Joyce who said, laws take about 8 to 10 years to pass in Congress. So he said, we're right on schedule. And I keep thinking that because we're hitting that like year 9 or 10 right now. And there does seem to be, especially from people who know way better than me, a lot of momentum this year. And all the things, as you just mentioned, that Schumer's saying, like when he says something's a priority, when he says it's important to him, like he usually gets it done. And he said that before for cannabis, but I think it was more at a certain point we were kind of like, okay, Schumer's gotten his tweet a week in on cannabis this year. And that's his goal for the year. This year, it does seem like he is interested in this passing. He's a very capable senator, obviously. So there's a lot of hope, that it will actually pass. And actually, I'm glad I accidentally said hope because I do want to mention that the HOPE Act is also up. It's not getting as much press, but it's really important, like Brad said. Sometimes you hear people saying HOPE and SAFE have to pass at the same time. Sometimes you hear people saying, no, there's a compromise and it's just going to be agreed that they're both going to come up. They're both really important for different reasons. They're both going to help social equity applicants. HOPE has more of a social equity tinge, obviously, and safer people, reasonable people can disagree how much that's going to help specifically social equity, although I think it will. But yes, exactly. Same thing as rescheduling. It's going to be interesting to see how states react. More so, I think I'm more interested to see how banks will react, right? Because everyone's really excited about it. But banks are still, they're conservative in terms of risk, right? So this idea that SAFER is going to pass, then all of a sudden, like banks are going to open their doors with welcome arms. Like, I don't expect that. I do expect that there's some waiting in the wings, getting ready to get started. And I'd be really interested in more professional services entering. So insurance, I know it sounds boring, but like insurance and accounting and a lot of the kind of white collar professional services where it's still really niche who does it. It'd be really interesting to see. I'm really hopeful that there's a lot of ancillary companies that kind of have that either rescheduling or banking as like a switch where they're ready to turn stuff on if that happens.
Yeah.
So it'd be great to see.
It's interesting what you said about banks and like, they don't like, just because safe banking or safer banking passes doesn't mean all the banks jump in, because I'm American but live in Canada, and we've had legalization for a long time, and still there's a very limited number of banks that actually bank cannabis sort of operators, especially the smaller operators. Like it's not a switch that turns on. There are some niche banks that do it, or some credit unions that do it, but the regulatory burden on the companies doing business there that the banks impose is really, really high. And so I think that's actually, I think it'll be not a watershed, but it'll start dripping over the waterfall if SAFE passes, and it'll be slower than people, I think, anticipate change, even with safer banking. So I agree with you there, Brad.
And I think that, us that are in the industry every day, we know federal reform is coming. We might not know when, but we know it's happening. We're not going backwards. I think safer or rescheduling kind of signals that to the broader population that might not be paying as close attention, or might not even understand the Farm Bill and what that did and changed, right? So this idea of something is going to change and we're going to be living in a legalized country eventually, that seems inevitable to me. I think this will show the rest of the country that that's where we're at.
So there's a psychic effect as well, even if it takes months or years for the banks or the more conservative professional service providers to get into the space. What impact do you think immediately there will be on the existing operators, the MSOs, if rescheduling or SAFE ultimately goes through? I mean, are we looking at a massive stock jolt? Are we looking at, how quickly? I would imagine those benefits will actually materialize before the actual benefits will.
Yeah, I think for sure. I think you'll see a stock jump. It was really interesting. There was the Horizon ETF, I think it was, randomly had a jump a few weeks ago. It spiked up. And I remembered the first thing I did was check Marijuana Moment, because I was oh my God, did the DEA announcement come out or something? And it happened. I couldn't figure out what had caused the spike. But that's how I'm waiting for it by the day. And yes, that's what we would expect. And also, a lot of these companies, they're going from slightly cash flow positive to just, off the wall overnight if they can eliminate the 280E tax issue. And a lot of people that are not profitable will probably cross over into profitable. So it would be another huge watershed moment. I'm pretty excited to see. I hear a lot of my clients saying what they would do is make operations more efficient, make operations more up to date, right? There's some earlier programs. Some people are still kind of using the older technology and stuff like that. And this would actually give them the opportunity to actually sit down and be now how can I actually make this the best operation, the most advanced operation, the safest operation? So I think it really would level up the industry if the money is deployed properly.
And what about the impact on social equity programs? Do you think that there's a danger in rescheduling or SAFE that the smaller operators are going to have a tougher time to compete?
You often hear that. I'm not 100% sure, right? Because a lot of the social equity applicants are individual dispensaries, and those companies are especially burdened by 280E, right? So if you're an MSO or you at least have vertical operations, there are different things you can do with your taxes to kind of try to minimize that. If you're a dispensary, I think somebody who owned a dispensary once told me their tax rate was effectively 70%, 70 to 90%. So it's hard to argue when a lot of social equity applicants are these kind of dispensaries that they're not going to get some benefit. But I think a lot of what people say is that the benefit will be the most kind of at the big company level. So we'll see how it plays out.
Well, I look forward to having you back when all these things happen all in the same week, like next week.
Yeah, it'll be really exciting. I always like to joke, if I'm having a rough day or I'm especially tired, that's going to be the day that it happens. Or even as much as I was talking about hoping it was announced at the State of the Union, I was sitting there watching it oh God, I kind of actually hope it doesn't, because I don't want to be up all night writing alerts about it.
That's right. It'll be a very busy couple of days or weeks. And I used to work in DC. It will happen like that. There won't be a week-long buildup. It'll be Monday morning, the week of your vacation, whenever that is, when it'll actually happen at the worst possible time. So, that actually tells you a lot. If the DEA announces on a Friday afternoon, they are like very much don't want to be doing it, but are being sort of dragged in. If they do it on like a Tuesday at 10 a.m. with a big press conference, that'll show that like everybody's gung ho and excited about it. But well, we'll be back to talk to you, Joanne, when it actually does happen. Because if you can fit us in, you'll be very busy.
I'm rooting for Monday, March 18th, when Joanne is moderating a panel on rescheduling for Cannabis Innovation Lab. That would be perfect timing.
Way to always look at plugs, Brad. Always look at plugs.
Questions just in case.
I love it. Well, Joanne and Brad, thank you again for joining us here today for United States of Cannabis. This is going to be a reoccurring conversation, obviously. Brad and I are here Tuesdays, every Tuesday at 10 a.m. Eastern. I want to say 9 a.m. Central, so we know that Brad and Joanne are actually bright and early with us, as opposed to me, where I sort of slack around for an hour or so before we go live. But thank you both for being here. Thank you all for joining us here for today's Cultivated Live. We encourage you to subscribe to our daily newsletter at cultivated.news. Follow us on LinkedIn. I have to say this because my kids are listening. You got to smash the subscribe button on YouTube if you're watching us there. We'll see you back here tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern on LinkedIn or YouTube. Have a great Tuesday. And I try to end every show by saying, buy cannabis at your local dispensary, and everybody on this show today can actually do that. So we'll see. We'll bring back your hauls and send me a snap of what you guys buy today. But thanks, Joanne. Thanks, Brad. We'll see you guys later.
Smashing it and snapping it. Thank you.
You got it. You got it.